Good morning, and thank you so much for being here. You are on the Community Plus Values DU Community Talks webinar. We've been putting these together for the last few months, and my name is Ann Ayers. I have the honor of being the Dean of the Colorado Women's College, and then this has become really a passion project for me, thinking through what do we need at DU so that we can feel an even deeper sense of belonging to this incredible community. So I have really appreciated the opportunity to lead this, and I want to start with a thank you to Chase McNamee, who's our project manager, to our three graduate fellows, Abigail Richards, Dong Din, and Dil Khan, and then also Tremaine Fisher, who is our behind the scenes IT guru who makes this all happen. So just a lot of gratitude for you all and showing up week after week and helping us put this together. So today we will have closed captioning. So you can use that on your screen. You'll see at the bottom, you'll see an option to show the captioning. So you can do that if that's something that helps you in this experience. And then also we invite you to put questions into the chat window. And you can put them there, you can put them into the Q&A, wherever works best for you. And about 40 minutes into this conversation with my good friend Tracy, who had to take a quick break between meetings, so she'll join us here in a second. About 40 minutes into that, we'll start giving voice to your questions. So that will be an important part of this conversation. So you're back, Tracy. I'm back. You're on mute.
Okay, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Hi, how are you? Thank you for the break.
I'm so glad to see you. You're never really on mute in life, ever. So that's just sort of funny to me. It's really, it's always an honor to be in your presence, but today and in this time in particular. So Dr. Tracie Keesee is the co-founder and senior vice president of Justice Initiatives at the Center for Policing Equity. She comes to us because she's a DU alumna, and that's how Tracy and I first found one another. She reached out to me about 2 years ago and said, hey, I'm working in the New York Police Department, doing a small job, Deputy Commissioner of Equity and Inclusion, your second Deputy Commissioner role there, so that's pretty extraordinary, and first in that particular role. That role was created and then first helmed by you. And so reached out to me and said, I just wanted to reach out to my alma mater and talk about some gender equity pieces. It took me maybe 45 seconds to think, I need this person on my board. So I invited you to be on the advisory board. I'm so grateful that you said yes. And I want to tell you a couple things before we get started, everybody, about Tracy's background. In addition to the years that she spent with the NYPD, she was in the Denver Police Department for 25 years. And served our community in some pretty incredible ways and continues to do that. Back in Denver now, we're happy to have you here again. You also have a TED Talk, Tracy, that I went back on and re-listened to last night. If you all have a chance, do it. You got 1.3 million views. I don't know how often you check in on that.
I didn't know that. Oh, that's a lot.
That's a lot. It's a pretty good ticker amount. It's terrific. So, and Tracy, I think it's always helpful. We're in an academic community. I like to talk about people's academic backgrounds. So a bachelor in poli-sci from Metro, a master of arts in criminal justice from the University of Colorado. And see, you've just shared the wealth with all of the local universities. It's good. And her PhD in intercultural communications from the University of Denver. So there we go. That's Tracy. Now the rest of us, can just only hope and aspire to those kinds of credentials and impact. I wanted to just start with a really, not perfunctory, but really like, let's just talk, you and me. How are you doing?
I'm exhausted. And thank you for the break. I'm tired, but so is everybody else. So I don't want to make it seem as if it's just my burden to carry, but I share part of the collective exhaustion that Black folks are going through right now. Yes. One, because of that, but two, because of the work that I do, which I absolutely love. But I would say one of my colleagues put it way I could not have found the words, but we're what you're watching is a funeral on high definition. Anger, exhaustion, tiredness, confusion. That's not just with Black folks, that's with the rest of the broader community as well. And so I'm tired, but I continue to be inspired by folks who have long before me got up and continue to do this work, well into their 80s. And so I just keep moving.
Yeah, you do. And yet you have shared with me that sometimes people who do this work have to really indulge in a little bit of self-care, and it's not an indulgence, it's a protective measure. So I think giving people the permission to do that in this work in particular, because the work calls you and you think, the world's on fire, I can't lie down right now.
So I mean, it is about self-care, but it's also for me, it is the struggle of not doing something, right? And I think a lot of folks of color carry this burden. No action is not an option. Most of us were raised that way. And so, so it is a matter of finding the balance of that self-care and talking to other people about self-care. I had a really long conversation with a chief this morning, and that was the first thing out of my mouth. I could physically look at them and tell that they were exhausted, and it's just like, you gotta take a minute and really sort of figure out how you're going to take care of yourself first. Otherwise, you can't get the work done. So I absolutely agree.
Wow. I'm glad that you're taking this time with us, because I do know you're in high demand.
It's my alma mater.
Your work, yes. Like I said, one of many. So I really believe that questions are sometimes more important than answers. I find that to be true of the people I've learned the most from, the teachers, the professors, the mentors.
Yeah.
What are the questions you think we all need to be asking right now?
Well, I mean, I think that's a great question, actually. I think there's lots of questions that are being asked, and then there are some that have yet to be asked right now. So for me, some of the questions that have to be asked are, what do we want to have happen here? What are we asking for? What are we in the streets demanding? And making sure that we are holistically looking at all of that, right? So what I've been telling folks is everything's on the table right now. This isn't just about policing. Everything's on the table. And so it's not just, what do we want to have happen? It's what do we expect to have happen? And what do we want from, not just from this moment, but from down the road 10 or 15 years from now? So the questions have been many, right? And you see that just how these conversations about the moment in time are sort of unfolding. And so I like your question. I think that for me, what I try not to do is to do just that. Say, well, we need to ask this. We need to ask this. Each sort of intersecting piece has tons of questions. And I can tell you, I'll just give you an example right now. Police officers across the country, most not all, have no idea what they're seeing right now. They have no idea what they are, what they're watching unfold here. Sometimes when you look at things through the lens of policing, it looks like a law and order situation. And so you will treat it as such. So they don't know what they're seeing. We also have folks that don't look like us, who are allies or new allies or, conspirators, however you want to say it, who also are doing a lot of self-reflecting because I think they believe they were helping the situation and now are questioning whether or not how they've been involved and engaged, if that was any help or did it hurt. So, I mean, there's all of these sort of really rich questions that are starting to come to surface about, this moment in time. And the interesting part about it is only time will tell. That's the hard part. And I think that folks are struggling because they want things to happen now, and rightfully so. If you think about our history as a people, 401 years, 155 years, in regards to some so-called freedom, that there's this struggle here about needing to have those changes be immediate. And that's why you see the defund the police, disinvest, is because these structures that were created, and they were created not in a way that certainly supports or helps Black folks grow, that the call is to make the pain stop.
Right.
And so that is, I don't know if there's anything more powerful for that than that. But then I would say the other question of that becomes one of, when we make it stop, what are we talking about? Are we talking about just temporarily? Or are we talking about long term, forever, to the end? So it's a great question. I love it. And you're right. The best professors always had you up in the middle of the night thinking about, there's no answer to this. I know there's no answer to this.
Right. Right. Well, you make a good point, which is that some of the questions we have to ask of ourselves, and people are starting to do that. That question of, have I been contributing to the pain and the bad structures, the poisonous structures?
Yeah.
And then, what do I want for my community out of all of this? I think it's about purpose, right? The protests start in pain, but they also have to have purpose.
They have purpose, and I
Yeah.
agree with you in that respect. And I think that what people have to understand is it looks different depending on the individual. But I think what's important about what's happening now, and this is just from a policing perspective, since that's the space that they occupy the most, is that historically there has been this narrative that there have been, maybe not the best, but there have been police community relationships, and that there was some level of trust there. All of what you're seeing now has put that, if not into question, but has absolutely sort of lifted up the fact that that was not the case.
Right.
That these were transactional relationships, and that the outcomes of those relationships were, one, two planes were very different, right? Two communication pieces happening there, two different experiences happening there, and yet they did not get to underneath the surface of what really is at stake and what's at hand. So it's been really interesting to sort of, try to understand where this is coming from all perspectives. I can explain, the lived perspective as a Black woman. I can tell you, I have some understanding of that, but not a complete, because I also sit in my own privilege, right? With, as you just mentioned, with multiple degrees and space to social distance. So you have to be able to, to put that in its perspective. But I also have folks that clearly don't know history, which I find surprising, but I guess not. And really, I guess now are taking the time to start educating themselves about what they did not know.
Yeah.
And I think that what you have happening is, while that sort of education piece is going on, folks are tired. They're not willing to necessarily want to wait while people get caught up. And it's an interesting space to sort of try to help folks manage and figure out. But I can tell you that we need to sit in this moment right now. There's a lot of folks trying to rush through this, and it's just not what it is. So.
Right. Well, we've talked. I mean, you get conflicting feelings about the fact that it's the attention and the energy that this work and that this moment is getting is so important, and it can be really significant if we do this right and differently. And yet there's some pain associated with the fact that we've seen moments like this before, that it takes forever to get here, and that we're not as cognizant of the past.
No, you're right. But I would say we haven't seen this moment before. And the only reason why I say this is a little different, Anne, is because of this. So the civil rights movement was the push to get into those social sectors, right? The education, housing, all of those things. What makes this different is that this has always been a generational experience, right? So what you have happening now is you've got not only multiple generations, but you have the effect of the civil rights movement, where you see us in almost every aspect of life, right? You've got surgeons, you've got folks who do, our work every day, the service providers, you've got professors. I mean, you've got folks at all walks of life who now are saying, from their perspective and from their perch and their space, no, we are not going to continue to do this. I can tell you what, it's for me, I know the last couple of weeks for me have been sort of like a blur, but when you hear, 4-star, 5-star generals who are in the military tell you what their experiences are or have been and continue to be in some spaces, that's what makes this different, right? Is now we have people who before were kept from those positions, in those positions, saying, yeah, no, we're still having the same issues from 50, 60, 70 years ago. I just happened to navigate and survive them. And the other part of this too, for folks who don't like to, admit this, we got a new generation of folks in the streets now that have the energy, and we have educated them in DU and through CWC. They've got the energy, they've got the knowledge, they know what they want, and this is different from where I was raised for this compliance and sort of kind of just get along and go along and don't do this.
Me too.
To, right? And most women are, and then it compounds the problem if you're at the, in the intersections, of gender and race and gender and identity. But you have a whole new breath of fresh air that is on the streets right now. And why this is different is because it's the recent past, right? My mother is still alive.
Right.
So it's not as if, this is our ancestors are talking to us and saying, this is never going to happen. This is recent past. And so you have now the fuel of our ancestors on all of this that makes it extremely different. And it is really that conversation. And the example I always use is, the Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben.
Right.
The products, right? You clearly don't think that was the first time somebody had mentioned to these corporations that the whole symbolism and the whole packaging was problematic. Right? I have no doubt. And I know for a fact, I watched, I think it was on MSNBC, that an old employee had said, we have been trying for decades to, to petition to get them to change. But they didn't do a thing, but now. So that's why, to me, it's a little bit different. So, I mean, I love it. This is the part, for those of you who are watching this is what Ann and I do. We get to have these conversations back and forth on a pretty regular cadence. But yeah, this is very different. And if you miss it, you're going to miss what the steps forward should look like, right? Because right now what we have folks doing, and we have it on the legislative and local session as well, people are passing legislation really fast, they're passing bills really fast. And then the other part of this too is if you're trying to address what's happening today with things from the past, you don't get it. You're missing it. So we really had to have folks sort of sit in this moment. You need to reorient, and then you need to start thinking through what should some next steps be. So don't rush to try to get through the moment because it's uncomfortable and painful.
Right. You say like if you don't slow down, you'll miss it. I just I don't know. It's sort of incomprehensible to me that one could miss it unless they were doing it voluntarily, like willfully kind of trying to just not hear.
And you have that too. So, I mean, yeah, I agree.
You wrote a Washington Post op-ed back on June 4th called After This Crisis, Policing Should Never Be the Same. And there's one line in there that I wanted to kind of ask you to unpack for us and give us some wisdom around, which is, when the fires die down, law enforcement leaders across the United States need to ensure that toxic beliefs die with them. So my question is, what are the toxic beliefs that need to be eviscerated? And then how? How do you do that?
Well, the how part is what we're doing right now, right? So that's all of what you see happening while folks are trying to figure out what to do. Right. But what I meant by that was the historical narratives around Black folks, brown folks, anybody who's an immigrant here.
Right.
And it really is about police culture. And if we don't attend to the culture that creates a lot of these perspectives and beliefs, then we have not done what this moment was meant for us to do. The other part of this too means that policing has to expand beyond just about the act, right? This is also a conversation about law enforcement versus public safety. And also, I think if I remember in there, in the op-ed, we police at the consent of the community. And the community is telling us right now, we do not have their permission to do and act and behave the way we're behaving.
Right. I mean,
so that's what I'm talking about. So, I mean, those are the things right now in the policing world that is really being talked about, that is being, pushed back on. So there's really a really healthy conversation happening within police. And I think that for folks who don't know, if how you're watching this play out, I want to be clear. In my 30 years, I've never seen so many chiefs either be fired or resign in a moment where leadership is necessary and needed. So that whole line was really about self-examination of us and what we need to do to
Right.
move forward. And so that was, living it. It's just like, yeah, if you don't get it now, I just don't know what to say. I mean, because part of this means the consent of the community is telling you no more. Then you don't say, well, wait a minute, what about this, right? It is
Right.
stop and hear what no more means, and then
Right.
begin to try to figure out how do you answer that, that statement, that call, that demand, or whatever, happens to come from community.
Right. What are the there are toxic beliefs that are going to exist inside of the police community, and then there's also going to be outside of that, there are toxic beliefs as well. Can you talk to us about that second half? What are the toxic beliefs of the community that also maybe need, the community leaders might need to step up and
Well, I mean, so again, it goes from the lived experience, right? And so I think what you hear in regards to toxic beliefs in the community, it really depends on your perspective and what your lived experience has been.
right.
I can tell you that there is no other explanation other than having a lived experience or shared experience with, whether it's a relative or close person in your family, that you can't explain millions of people in the street on day 26 and say it's isolated incident or it's isolated incidents.
Right.
So you have to own that. But you also, and I also mentioned this in the op-ed as well, my entire career, I've worked with thousands of people who try to do the right thing every day.
Right.
And they go out and do that, and credit should be given where credit is due. And I hear the community saying that, and again, you would sense I get torn because you shouldn't have to qualify, but often we're put in a position where we have to. But it is one of which, we have people who want to do the right thing and are trying to do the right thing, and oftentimes they're given that credit. But I also think the community also needs to understand how organizations and police cultures work. So it's more than just a thin blue line. It's more than just, keeping secrets. We have officers of color, women, our definitely our queer family is represented in that as well.
Right.
And the experience that they are going through in these organizations are similar to what's happening outside of the organization. So I think what's difficult for the community is when you've had an experience for so long from a government entity that was supposed to be designed to protect you, it's hard not to see any other narrative, as is internally with policing, when you
Right.
have been dispatched in a way as which that these are the enemy or this is a war. Then that same thing, it's that the whole narrative, it's very hard to begin to unpack that, especially when it's reinforced every day. Right, or on camera. I shouldn't say every day, but we see enough video now, camera footage, experience. But we also have both sides of that, where community has been at the table with officers and chiefs who've tried to do the right thing, and they do. They go back to community and try to, help negotiate through those conversations about, look, we're talking about not all, we're talking about, a section of it, but what you're also talking about is the historical compounding experience that community has had. So both narratives, whether they're toxic or not, are designed and sort of brought to life because someone has either experienced them or seen them or put them into operation. So
Right.
I mean, I always love your questions, but I mean, right now there's lots of folks who would tell you right now the whole world is toxic.
Right.
We're just going through so much right now.
Yeah. No, I think it really is, and yet you do see bright lights occasionally here and there that you have to hold on to them for hope. Back to that resilience conversation that we were having at the beginning.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you see that are giving you hope? I mean, the conversations with the chiefs that you're having, the conversations with communities. Where are those through points that?
I mean, they're all over. So I mean, I think what gives me hope is when I see young people activating. I mean, I can tell you as a grandmother, I for decades didn't know if the next generation had it. I would be one. I am complicit. I'm the one to say, yeah, I don't know. You know, we send them to college. I don't know if they get it, if they experience it. So seeing them activated brings me joy.
Yeah.
What that's so there's a piece of that, and I'm not talking about we know that there's criminality that happens everywhere, but seeing young folks activated brings me joy. Seeing people, watching light bulbs go off in people when you're having conversations, or when you send them back and say you need to go back and read the following things, and then re-engaging with them and hearing the light bulbs go off.
Right.
Those kinds of things bring me joy. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't say my family. I mean,
Sure.
I've had some remarkable conversations with my mother, who was
Wow.
in the South. Some just remarkable conversations with her. And so, but I would say that in addition to that is because I have a belief that fundamentally people are good people. I just do, and I think that there's enough people in this world who are getting it now and are trying to figure out ways in which they can be long-term, impact and help in getting all of these things starting to get realigned and corrected. So, I mean, all of those things do. And I think that for me, it's just hearing the conversation finally out in the open that we've never settled this. We've never settled this. And so hearing people from all walks of life, whether you're a VP or a CEO, or if whether or not you are someone that is driving people around, hearing people actually say it out loud, as opposed to me, and I'm sure other folks have experienced this too, trying to navigate whether or not how the person feels about you when you walk in the room, or what they said, if they meant to say that, or did they mean to say that.
Right.
So it's just, I think for me, those kinds of things are the things that get me up in the morning, and conversations like this. I mean, you and I have them on a regular basis, but just conversations about this.
I am so struck by the fact that when I started getting really interested in gender equity, was kind of my door into the larger conversation about equity. And I think at this point you can't separate those, right? We've talked a lot about that. I think gender and race and ethnicity, that just comes together. It's inextractable. When I would have these conversations, and I was working in the corporate world, and I would go in and talk to leaders about, are you going to invest in diversity? And their question was, why should I? And now that question is, how? So it feels like a huge step forward to me that we're not having to prove the problem anymore, right? And,
no, that's not true.
No, you don't think so? All right.
No, that's not true.
Yeah.
So it's not that you don't have to prove the problem. It's whether or not people believe there is a problem, right? So I think we have done, including yourself, a tremendous amount of work proving the worth of having other in your organizations, boards, right, or whatever, right? I mean, there's been studies ad nauseum, as they say. What is it? Analysis paralysis.
Right.
We know. The
right.
question is, are you scared enough to do something about it, right? So that's where I'm struggling right now, because there's a lot of folks that are reacting, and the reaction is, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that woman. I don't want to be that man, right? I don't want to be in that space saying I'm not doing it. I don't get it. And so I love that, the fact that you're like, yeah, we've been saying this for a while. You have been saying this forever, right? There is value in bringing in that diversity, bringing in that different lived perspective. They really, I think, and I use that they really collectively. The question, here's one of the questions we have to answer: why all of a sudden now are you going, what do I do? What do I do? Right? And so I think that we've built everyone up to the point where, we've been on it. It's just like, no. And yet this window, this moment, all of a sudden corporations are going like, oh no, there must have been some truth, to this. And the rest of us know, it's like, yeah, no, we've been telling you for quite a while, that this. And so for me, I think some of them get it. I still think some are struggling, because when you watch corporations, and I sort of have been paying attention over the last couple of weeks, all of a sudden we have the first Black, first female in 200 something, 150 years. It's like, so why now? They have always been there. They've always been qualified. Why now? And so I think that's why you see, folks asking how authentic the change and the next steps will be. But I think that without the work that you have done in corporate, corporate America, and I'm going to say this 100 times, not just because I'm an alum. My mom went to CWC, and when you empower people and educate people to understand their worth, this is what happens, and this is
Right.
what's supposed to happen. And so I think that I think corporate America is getting it now, but I think all of the studies that have said, this is not corporate America, I'm just not going to pick on them. This is everybody, right? If you can look at the boards, and we knew that if you had women there, that outcomes and risk would be different. And so it's
Right.
just one of those things. It's like typically the environment is different. So yeah, I don't know what's happening here, and I just think that when you put value on people, it's just I think we still have a lot of it to unpack. So I think some are getting it, but I think when you put value on, as opposed to accepting that, as we always talk about, the authentic person that's coming to you with that lived experience and perspective, it's going to be interesting.
Tell me, in your journey, where did you discover your sense of self-worth? I mean, there might have been several points, but are there seminal moments?
Well, I can tell you the seminal moment is when I was a little girl. My mother and my family told me I was powerful, that you're a good kid, you can do whatever you want to do. My great grandmother used to tell me that all the time, and she was a descendant of slavery. She's like, you do whatever you want to do, you can do it. And so the self-worth starts from beginning. It is the attack on self-worth that happens as you move through your journey, and that you have to try to protect. And so that's why when you hear our young folks talk about imposter syndrome, right, about whether or not they belong or they are worthy, although they're credentialed and they should be in that space. So it is having to navigate those spaces where your worth is challenged, is where you have to be resilient and have the support to get through those things. I've done a lot of navigating throughout my entire life and throughout my entire career, especially in policing, right? Clearly, and I think we've all done it, you have to pick your battles.
Sure.
You absolutely had to pick your battles. And not only did you pick your battles, you had to weigh that with what is the worth, not just to me and my family's well-being in regards to having a paycheck, but what does it mean for the broader group that's here? And so there was lots of navigating and lots of identity negotiation. So there was a lot of those things. But my initial self-worth was from when I was a little girl, and I was told, yeah, you do what you need to do. Although teachers would say, Tracy's a little out of control. I'm going to date myself. When you used to have discipline issues in elementary school, they used to pin a note to you. I love the trust factor. They used to pin a note to your parents to you for you to deliver to your parents. So there was like a punishment piece in there, right? So you do the slow walk. I was a billboard, literally. I had front, back, carrying them. They were delivered in the mailbox. And so it really is about how do you negotiate how people think they value you, right? And so you have to really not just own you, but you always have to say and always have to voice the fact that your mere presence is not just a worthy issue or a value issue. It is me, right? And don't allow anybody to put that value on you. It's like, this is me. And so, and this is what I think what's just so refreshing about, the new, I always say the new kids, because everybody looks really young to me, but they understand that. They know their value. So as opposed to worth, I say they know their value. And they know their collective value is even more powerful. And so I think that is, for me, that's sort of been inspiring on my end to watch that. But the other part for me, though, is it was a negotiation, but it was validated every time I went home from school. I mean, I could have been a billboard, but there wasn't anybody saying, stop doing that, don't do that, don't do this. It was really about, okay, let's talk about what's really going on. And I think that's was really more important to me, and it really has stayed with me. I mean, I think if it would have been resolved any other way, I probably would not have turned out the way that I was, and I was no angel. But it was one of those things where folks were not trying to amplify the negativity of speaking out, right? Saying no, saying I don't understand. and that's a gender thing that's often put on a lot of folks.
Right.
And so for me, that was it. And I was one of those kids that was, if you by standards, if you want to put by systems, I mean, I was in and out of the principal's office, and my mother would just laugh, and she goes, "The fact that you were a cop is just unfreaking believable." I'm like, I know.
Right. I know.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, you're not dating yourself that much because, as you know, I have these 4 little boys, and I've got one who regularly just come a pin to his back in kindergarten, and like daily, and it was. At some point I did put a note back on him to the teacher, and I said, this is the equivalent of talking behind someone's back. Just tell him. Like, just tell him.
Exactly. Right.
It's right. Like, it's
exactly right.
So
exactly right.
Yeah. And my mom, actually, this is sort of funny, but you might be kindred spirits just a little bit. She went to St. Mary's here in Denver.
Yeah.
And she would take white out. She might be listening. You mom, she's gonna kill me for this. But she would take white out and she would paint on the bottom of her little saddle shoes with her outfit, full on one shoe and shit on the other. And she'd sit like this, which you were supposed to sit with your feet on the ground, right? And she would sit like this. And then she'd get sent out. She did it intentionally in 3rd grade. Just get out of here. Just go down the hall and go see Father so-and-so, your principal. And she would shuffle down the hall and that white paint would come off. She'd get down there.
Genius.
I had no idea what they're talking about. She's like, I think I may have sent a few nuns to their graves, just shaking.
But no one ever asks the question: is what is that? What's going on?
Yeah.
What's happening? What's happening? So she found her voice too. I mean, early, which is awesome.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you're just saying, you don't. It's not about what you do. It's just about the fact that you were born that makes you worthy of love and respect.
Yeah. And I think what's struggle too when you talk about, for a lot of us, we use the word worth in different ways, right? And I think that what I know we've always struggled with as we think about our connections to history, about slavery and what are you worth, right? That has always been a struggle. And so it's one of those things that I have value. That's it. I have an extreme amount of value. And so it's one of those things, and I think that's something I worry about. We've passed on to the next generation of women as well, is how do you define your worth, value, all those things. And I think what I like seeing coming out of that is just that, right? So words, and you and I both, words matter, right? And not just words, but how they are tied to you matter. And it's just, example is you hear the word police reform, and I've been in many forums where I have to tell people, let me be clear, reform is a trigger word for community. Right. Because you've been reforming and doing best practicing on certain communities for long time. And so there is just no more, that word has no value anymore. Right. And that's why you hear without systemic and procedural change in law enforcement, there's nothing absent that, right? Because we've been programmatically performing and doing all those things. And I think that's a struggle. And that's new language for law enforcement. The other challenge is we're speaking different languages. Not only are we having different experiences, but we're speaking different languages. And really putting I would say, at least in the same area, where do we all recognize what this is and what this is supposed to signify? So it's as I navigate both of those spaces, because my role is to help folks think through what does policing look like on the other side, and not to say your idea doesn't matter, or that's never going to happen, or that's ridiculous, and blue lives, all lives, no lives, and all of those things. That you can hear it if you're not listening. And this is the most underrated skill. People will tell you that you just need to listen. And it's hard. I didn't realize how hard it really is. But people struggle. They want to respond. They want to react. Listening is a skill all in itself. Yeah.
There's a word that's showing up all over the press, which is defunding. Tell us, I think that there are multiple interpretations of what that means right now, and it's causing a lot of confusion. Can you talk to us about what does that really mean? What does it look like? How's it being used?
So the defunding conversation is on a spectrum, and it's going to really depend on the community. So it's got to be community centered, community driven. I can interpret it many ways, but I can tell you the sort of the parameters and some of the sort of middle extreme, whatever you want to call it, really sort of get at, right? So there are some that when you say defund the police, it's just like abolish police. We need to have a better way to do this work. We need to have a better way of providing safety to a community. So it's pretty straightforward. It is what it is. With most of these things, it's always going to be in the details. But that's what it is. There are others along the same spectrum where it is really about pulling policing out of social spaces where they do not belong. And You've heard me talk about this a lot. And this is really around why do you have police officers showing up to people who are in mental health crisis? Why isn't that money that's spent on that particular salary or training being diverted to the mental health system, right? So why are we not creating a system where that call should never have to happen? And it is one in which where you hear also just the fact that policing budgets are majority of police budgets, any budget is its personnel. And the one way of going after, getting policing out of communities in the way that it's showing up is to cut personnel. It's just to say, yeah, you don't have the money, so you're going to have to let people go. You're going to have to lay people off, do whatever you need to do, but you're not going to be able to keep this going, right? So it does go along the spectrum. How it shows up, how it's interpreted, how it is negotiated on the ground will be up to community. And police is going to have to be at some point put into that position so they can understand what's being asked. Because really what's being asked here, one of the things that's not being said but being sort of asked implicitly is what does public safety look like for us now moving forward? What should public safety be? And to me, that's another sort of like big question. But it also goes back to, for example, like in San Francisco, are you in uniform? Are you carrying a gun? Are you actually the person that I really need at the door right now, as opposed to you waiting for someone to come to do what needs to be done? And so, for example, they're talking about putting folks in out of a militaristic uniform, but being able to serve, to provide a service. So if you're in trouble from a mental health perspective, the only folks that are showing up are mental health people. That's it. And then from there, they should be the activator of the larger system. So if you're not taking your meds regularly, or if you need to have a caseworker that checks on you regularly, that's where that should be happening and activated. Yeah. And so that's sort of that spectrum piece. But what everybody means by what, that it depends on where you are in the community, where you are in the experience. Each city is different. There's some unification around each sort of those pieces. Right now, I can tell you the role that we are playing with our chiefs is that we're asking them to do you got to do internal. You can't even begin to do external work until you look inside internally. They have enough data to begin to look at, calls for service. Why are they being asked to respond? Where is what we call crime, and how are we defining crime? And how do we overlay, a lot of that work? And you can go in and you can look at it. It will show up in those spaces of where you shouldn't be. And so that's sort of the first layer of work. And again, we talked to the chiefs about in the community is that that's not an answer. That's a beginning step. That is not an answer. And so they have to begin to look at those things internally, and depending on how big and how small you are, it takes a little bit, not a long time, but it takes a bit to sort of figure out how do you begin to recalibrate on what community is asking you to do. Yeah. And so, but the most important part in all of this, though, even on these spectrum pieces, is for community to do what, much like they're doing, is voicing and say, what do you want out of your public safety? What should it feel like, look like, not be, should be, never happen? So all of those things have to be taken in and help sort of figure out what's the new policing on the other side going to look like.
So this ties in really nicely. We're going to move into Q&A, and we have a lot of questions. So I want to try to get to all of them. And there are the two of them that seem to go together for me. One is, Dr. Kazee, do you think that it will make a difference that police departments are looking to recruit from other disciplines such as social work and medicine? the person says, I know this is happening in Denver. My son and daughter-in-law are fairly new to the Denver Police Department and both came from the medical field.
Yeah.
That's one question. I want to tie this other one in, which is, how is abolishing the police different than diverting funds to other resources and keeping a police force? I think there's a little bit of both, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So let me go with the abolishing first, and how is that different? So abolishing means that there's just no police. There is no physical structure. There's nothing called police. There's no uniforms. There's no military. That the responses to whatever's happening in the community are going to be different than what the current structure is. That's one way to look at it. And I say that's one way because other people are interpreting these things in very different ways. So hopefully that answered that question. I don't know if I did, but you could share my email and we can finish these conversations. The other part about the change happening within departments and the benefit of having people who don't come from backgrounds, you know, or other police departments or just new, right? And we're bringing in those service things. And I would say this, that the intent of bringing in people who have backgrounds in social service, medics, psychologists, even accountants. I will even go with people who are not in that space. It is important to have those perspectives and experiences if we use them in the way in which we should be using them. The concern that we always have is, and this is the same thing in the Kerner Commissioner report in 1967, when they mentioned, well, you want a department that's diverse and represents the community. So then there was this influx of hiring Black officers, right? So I came into Denver under consent decree, right? There was this influx, but what was not being accounted for was the culture they were going into, right? So if you go into a culture, so if the recruiter says, oh my gosh, you've got a degree in psychology, it'll be great with what's going on right now. Some of that is proven to be true. But if you go into a culture where they're saying, we don't want you to bring your lived experience or one of the main reasons why we hired you, then that's a little different. The outcome will be different on the other side. So I think what we're really starting to have big conversations around is not only the composition of police departments, but exactly that. What type of skill set do you want to do the type of policing that you're asking for? Right. And so all of those things have been talked about for years, right? Do you want them to have college degrees? You know, in most police departments, you only have to have a high school diploma. Do you want them to be, you know, to have a certification program where you can't be a cop unless you've gone through like 3 years, right? And so it's all of those things and more. But part of what's going on with having, you know, new folks coming into the police department is the culture they're coming into. Because you can have the best intentions, the greatest training in the world, but if you step into a culture that says that stuff doesn't matter, and now you're trying to survive it, the people are going to look extremely different on the other side. Right. And so we're trying to realign all of those things that are happening. And again, not to say that the profession, you know, has done a lot for me. And it certainly was learning moments for me along the way as well. But part of it too is not just who's going in, what's the background. You have to understand the sort of median age of a police officer going to the academy is around 22, 23. For most of our audience, they're probably still there. But for those of us who are older, you have a lot of growing to do, you know, and we're putting you in a lot of positions where you have to make some really, you know, quick decisions about people's livelihoods. Yeah. So there's all of those things are back on the table about how old, with, you know, the background, degrees, experience, so all of it's there. But again, it's not going to matter if you don't deal with the culture itself.
This is where you've been really helpful, I think, advising me and then the steering committee for C+B. It's a parallel problem, which is that we say at DU, you know, that we want students from different backgrounds. We would like Black students, we would like Latinx students, we would like students of color, we'd like students with disabilities, and then they get here. That's right. And the experience that they're having is not measuring up to the expectation. And so you've been so valuable in helping us think about reconciling that. Now I see in your work that you're doing on the other side, you know, sort of how you're doing that. All right, we have like 6 questions, so I'm gonna pause on that thought, but recognize it. And then, okay, so do you feel like part of the difference in the diverse turnout among young people is somehow connected to the accompanying income inequality that younger people are experiencing? I ask because I think that what has oftentimes proven to be the barrier that stops, and in quotations, liberal white allies from doing more has been the requirement that they do more to give up their financial, housing, and employment benefits.
Yes. So to answer that question, that's part of it, right? There's lots of things converging. So if you think about who is unemployed right now, right?
Right.
You think about who is unemployed or who's seeking employment, right? So if you just graduated, right? So you have a whole swath of folks. So I think that's, so income inequality is a part of it, but also you have to look at, inequality on multiple levels, right? So not just that, housing, healthcare, and people forget we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, right? And the equities that are happening in the healthcare industry are not new. So I think it's part of that is that they're experiencing it not necessarily for the first time, but under the probably different perspective that they didn't think it was going to be like this. That you should be able to do, that and so I absolutely think that's a part of it. It's also a part of what you see happening in the streets and multitude of folks. So you've got high unemployment numbers. You not only you have equity issues throughout the gamut, but you also have folks who have been complying to what has been asked of them in this pandemic. And then when you look at the issue of race and policing, questioning why you could not respond the way to that issue the same way you just did to this pandemic or you continue to do.
Right.
So there's some visual inequities that I think are helping with some of those light bulb moments. But yes, as far as not just your income, but it's all those inequities that are also feeding into the pot, right? So it's what people are experiencing right now. It's and some of that experience is is race is not a matter. It's just that we're in it now, but it's a galvanizing moment where folks are saying not only is that not right, this isn't right either. And so it actually does fill the streets more with a diverse group of protesters.
Right. All right, thank you for that. I'm gonna move us through these. What needs to happen from a research perspective to help police departments understand their lack and opportunities for transformation? I mean, this is you're a data science analytics group.
More data,
more
researchers. But it has to be the right questions, right? So we talk about questions, and then you also have to reconcile the historical negative relationships that have been with police and research, right? Not a big science group at all. The first thing I would say is that we need more of it, right? And we always need more of it, but we have a lot already that points to problems with the reason why departments have struggles with changing, right? Paramilitary structure, really group cohesion. There's things that have already been sort of identified as those spaces, but we need more, especially as we come into this moment where there's going to be a tremendous amount of systemic change. That's got to be measured to see whether or not it's going to make a difference in what we're all talking about here. Right. So it's collecting, not just looking at what's been done, but then preparing to collect the new. The other part in this space is that notoriously police have crappy data, bottom line. They don't collect for the things that we as researchers really want to know. So often we have to create our own forms, our own sort of metrics we need to get pulled into police departments, which if you've ever worked with police departments are usually pretty closed. And so they don't want to share any of that stuff. So it's really...
Is it confirmation? I was just asking, is it confirmation bias or is it lack of funding? Is it lack of know-how? Why don't police departments have better data?
It's what's being asked of us.
Okay.
Right? So it's not necessarily confirmation bias. It's more so is the federal government requires us to report unifying crime reports, right? So that means that every time there's a crime, we write that down, we collect it, we upload that up to the feds. That's typically all that's ever been asked of us, right? And so as we have over the last 30 decades, you start to expand out. This is why the racial profiling bills had become so prevalent, right? Because you weren't collecting race. You weren't collecting where the stops were happening, collecting outcomes of those stops, whether or not contraband was found. So that's why you start to see these sort of expansions on additional questions, because we've only have historically been asked to provide certain metrics for certain crimes. And then we try to use that to answer some of the most pressing questions. And most of us know, you who do research, if you don't have the right set of data, you can't answer the question.
Right.
And so what we have is community asking a tremendous number of questions, and some of those are going to go unanswered because we simply didn't collect the data.
Right.
Or we don't have the ability to do that. So the answer to that question is more scientists in this space and really going after what needs to be collected to answer the questions community and chiefs have. So it's not just community. Chiefs have a lot of questions too. And when you turn around to them and say, well, your data doesn't allow it, I mean, you could just see the shoulder slump, and they're like, well, how am I going to respond? And then you have to talk about, well, let's set up collection so we can get that data in and begin to help you.
Yeah, you see the shoulder slumping and I see opportunities for student internships.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I see research projects. I see a lot. So
yes, we have lots of interns. So yes, you're absolutely correct.
So we have about 4 minutes left, and people usually join us sort of over their lunch hour. So I always try to be respectful of time. There are 2 questions left. I'm going to tell you both at the same time. One is, how is your organization, the Center for Policing Equity, how do you help police departments during this time? And then a second question is, could you address the Bubba Wallace incident with the NASCAR driver who, found the.
Oh, yes, I know. I don't know if I can address it. I probably can add perspective to it.
Yeah.
But let me talk about how CPE is helping chiefs through this time, and I've sort of spoke to this earlier. Right now, what we do with our chiefs is we do data collection. We do help them look at and actually bring in data sets that we can help sort of point them into directions, right? So we can never truly answer the question because of the way they collect it, but what we can do is do pointers for them, and then we can also tell them what is not theirs, right? So for example, one of the things that we talk about with them are traffic stops, pedestrian stops, and use of force. So we know there's going to be disparities there. And so what we do is that work then points them to not just that disparity, but it allows them then to go into the entire organization and look at, let's for say, I'm just going to throw this out there, doesn't mean anything, like there's Brooklyn North, right? So now we're going to look at that particular space and see what's going on there, right? Why is there so many use of force? What types are there? What's going on with the policy? Aren't people being held accountable? So it serves as a pointer. That's what we do. But in this moment in time, we found ourselves leaning on the side of the house that we typically don't do much of, and that is the culture of policing. And how do you begin to engage with, and how do you think about what's happening in this moment in time? So right now, a lot of what my work is around culture. And so what are the things that we begin to sort of have to lift up for, not only for discussion, but there's a lot of self-reflexive work that has to go on right now with policing, especially with our police leaders. There's a lot of work around their own individual organizations, and I tell people this a lot, the officers on the street don't make policy. I know a lot of the anxiety and anger goes towards that group. They're taking their directions from someone. So that means that the group of officers that are out on the skirmish lines and the protest areas have to be and have to have the same kind of space to understand what's going on and to voice what's going on. And so that's a lot of the work that we're doing right now and helping chiefs really think through. And there's a lot of questions that leaders have to ask themselves right now, especially from a values perspective. A lot of questions they've got to reconcile. So quickly then, let's talk about the Bubba Wallace thing. So I think that what we have to remember is that he didn't find the noose. It was reported to him that there was one there. And so we have to look at this in sort of time sequence, right? And if you remember the reaction around that. So let's talk, NASCAR historically has been a white male Southern thing, right? And so we do have folks of all colors that do like NASCAR, so I'm not just saying it, but whether or not they would show up in a NASCAR race as opposed to watching it on TV is a sort of a different thing. But what you had that was interesting about that was you probably had people in NASCAR speak out in ways they would have never done it. It's not as easy just enough for Bubba to have that T-shirt Black Lives Matter, to have a car that says Black Lives Matter. That symbolism sometimes is just allowed, right? It's allowed. But to activate people in a space that historically have not spoken up or have contrary ideas was what was so interesting about this. So if you remember the picture of, there's a thing they do in NASCAR when they push the cars to the starting line. If you remember the photo where all of the drivers were helping him push his car. I don't think that would have happened, right? So that's one thing. So then we do another time sequence when the FBI comes in and they say, no, we believe it's just the pulley down for the garage. Here is the problem. not that there was a problem with the investigation, but here's the problem why you hear, community and Black community being suspect of it. Same reason why we had, I think a couple weeks ago, I know we did, where we had Black men, hanging from a tree. There is historical trauma with that symbolism of a noose,
Right.
and with federal government doing investigation. And so when you combine that with where we are in this country right now, you can understand why some folks are suspect that that's not what it was.
Right.
And you can understand why other folks are saying, well, now you owe us an apology because that's not what it was. But then what you miss is that might not have been what it was, but it provided an opportunity for all of you to engage Bubba and understand what his lived experience and perspective has been. And it's been a combination of both. And I say that for Bubba. I say that for, I don't know this person, and I'm not necessarily a political person either, but Senator Tim Scott has received threats
Right.
on both sides now. So it's not that he's just getting it from one, he's getting it from both sides on this issue of policing. And so we're in this really interesting moment in time where these things are being lifted up, and it's really pushing people, some, not all, pushing people to have to step up and make a statement, right? So you can either be about it or you're not, but you can only stand still for so long. And so that's, for me, that was the interesting thing to watch. And there's so many dynamics in there for his situation. What if he did find the noose? What if it was him? Would it have mattered? As opposed to, somebody else found it and told him.
Right.
But just the mere fact that you have, historical drivers, people who are considered, icons in the NASCAR business, standing next to him, signaling the fact that we're not doing this anymore. Right. Pulling down of the Confederate flag, that sent shockwaves through everybody. I was shocked.
Yeah, I was too.
I was shocked. So it is those moments that are allowing us to push up more types of concepts and things that are happening, and to discuss them even more. So now we scrutinize things with a different eye in some cases, some not. So I think that, for me, that's what the Bubba Wallace piece was. And I think like most folks, when you first saw that, you shook your head. But then I also had people rationalizing, well, that's just the way they are. And I had to say, no, that's the problem, right? Because we just let that go. So I don't know if I answered the question, but that's where I was with that.
I think you did. I mean, I think you did what you said you were going to do, just provide perspective in a way I hadn't thought about it. And so, Tracy, what I value so much about you is that you are pragmatic, and you play the hand you dealt, sort of like the Wallace thing. Let's take a look at the effect, right, of what we're moving in our community, and see how we can kind of chase that momentum. I think that you just do that so gracefully and powerfully, and so I really appreciate that. As we're talking, we have some challenges at DU. I think we have challenges with our students don't feel safe. We had the whole "we can do better" situation with sexual harassment, sexual discrimination, and we have huge challenges around students of color, faculty of color, female faculty, and beyond. And we really need your help. So all of that to say, I'd love to have you come back and help us dig. Maybe chapter 2 could be in how do we create a better partnership within our community? How do we create a safer place? And one where these students who we're doing so much for can really go and shine. Because we need this culture shift, and so I'm just
always.
Thank you for your expertise. Yay! I love that you're a DU graduate, and that you're a CWC legacy. And so we're just super, super grateful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and let us know how we can support you in your work at DU.
I appreciate you. I thank you. I know, and you all do. You're always been very helpful for me. So, but thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Take care and stay well.